Live and local, this is Good Morning PD on Live 95.
Welcome back to Good Morning PD Live 95 on a Thursday morning. Thanks to our good friends at Schofield. Thanks to Reggie Armstrong for coming by, spending a little time with us, talking about charitable giving and the way it's changing under the Trump tax reform and proposal. When you think of Trump right now, you're thinking all about, Russian collusion or not. I did see something this morning that I think is a very, very relevant number. For the first time since he got elected president of the United States, the RCP polling average for Donald Trump. Now, the liberals will tell you, yeah, but the Rasmussen poll has him at 46, and you got to discount that. But they don't tell you about the ABC News poll, who has him at 31. That's, that's fine to have that 31%. You just got to throw this 40-some-odd% out. But for the first time in his presidency, the aggregate of all the polling collected is over 40%. Now, that's not a big number, and that's still a troubling number. But once again, as I've said many, many times on this show, Donald Trump is not an American president who will ever be liked by 60% of its people. I mean, it's not. He's too polarizing a political figure. I'm very interested, and I'm going to give you listeners out there something to pay close attention to. Trump was at about 34 or 5 when all of this nonsense started. Or maybe not. Maybe it is nonsense. We'll find out in due time. And I'll be the first to admit that if there is evidence that Donald Trump colluded with Russia, that there was anybody on behalf of the Trump campaign who colluded with Russia, who worked and orchestrated with the Russian government, Vladimir Putin or not, to get Donald Trump elected, then I'm off the Trump train. I don't want to be a part of that. That's beneath the office of the president. No matter how much I pull for the outsider, no matter how much I want somebody to take on the establishment, I don't want to be a part of that. But I equally want you to understand, if you're a never Trumper or a Trump hater or hashtag, Trump needs to go wherever, you've got to accept the reality that if there is indeed some evidence that suggests there was an organized effort by some other forces to potentially impede or prohibit Donald Trump from being elected American president, you've got to feel just as much energy and emotion about that as you do whether or not Trump colluded with Russia. These are the competing narratives that we have. And yesterday, CNN and Jeffrey Toobin said something that I think I've talked a little bit about on this show, and it goes back to Trump being prepared for everything. And it goes back to a little bit about what we talked about in the first hour. Why do we believe, or why do you believe, that Mueller versus Trump is a mismatch? Because CNN's told us that, Mueller's an accomplished prosecutor. He's an old hand in Washington. I mean, he's been around the block. Trump better be real careful with Bob Mueller. It is a mismatch. It is an absolute mismatch. Mueller is no match for Donald Trump.
The other way.
How many subpoenaed or how many interrogations do you think Donald Trump, how many times has he ever been deposed in his life? And the difference in Trump and Mueller is every time Trump appeared or had to testify in one of these sorts of hearings or his account was given and taken, it was his money on the line. He's exposed to financial liability. It is indeed a mismatch. Bob Mueller doesn't spend his own money when he prosecutes or defends. Bob Mueller doesn't spend his own money when he does work on behalf of the federal government. When I was a county council member, the easiest thing I can do is spend your money. And Bob Mueller's an old hand at politics. In essence, he's a high-level political bum. His entire world has been about operating and finding a way for the federal government to pay him for a job that is above reproach. And that's the language you hear thrown around Washington. These people are above reproach. How dare you question the integrity of a former FBI director? Well, I think you're a bunch of idiots if you don't question the integrity of a former FBI director, and I think there's more information. I'll go back to the memo. You and I were talking during the break. Mm-hmm. I think you got to be real careful if you're a Republican in regards to this 4-page memo. We've heard words like jaw-dropping. We've heard words like shameful, and it will shock you to the core to find out what the government did indeed involve itself in this issue relating to Donald Trump. But I think you got to be real careful because this is a Republican narrative. It's a memo. It's not an official report. It's designed, it's organized, it's orchestrated by members of a political party, the House in particular, who are very much in the Trump camp as it relates to whether or not this is a senseless investigation into something that there's nothing that has been proven. I go back to what I think the most important, and I still believe this. I think the most important thing is did the FBI, DOJ, and State Department initiate this investigation to obtain a FISA warrant because of a dossier? Because, Rev, if you take this memo and you make it public and you not allow for it to be vetted by some sort of neutrality, in other words, let's go to the Department of Justice. Let's take this 4-page memo. Let's go to DOJ and let's say, hey, here's the conclusion we drew. I mean, we've interviewed, we've gathered information, we've talked to a lot of different people, but we're Republicans. And we understand how hackish this can appear if we're not careful. Take this memo, take a month or so, and tell us where you believe we're wrong. It's a commentary. It's a narrative. It's a memo. It's not anything. It's a little bit like Paris Climate Accord. Kind of a handshake. You know, you do this and I'll do that. There is no binding to this memo. It's not some legal binding document. And I think if you issue and release the memo in the current construct of it being a Republican version of the accounts of what happened, I think it almost looks like the counter to the dossier. We know the dossier was fabricated. We know the dossier was opposition research on Donald Trump paid for by Fusion GPS, who got the money from the DNC, who got the money from the Clintons. I mean, we know that money trail. I mean, that's fairly well known, even in the mainstream. The money started and originated in Clinton, not the foundation, the political arm of the Clinton operation. It goes to the DNC. The DNC funnels the money to Fusion GPS. GPS pays Christopher Steele. Steele creates this dossier that is opposition research, and that's why if you're not somebody that hates Donald Trump, you kind of dismiss and discount what's in the dossier. We kind of laugh at it a little bit. And it's, you know, even the New York Times won't report on some of the dossier because they believe the majority of it is fabricated. Well, if the Republicans travel that road, I think they got to be careful because I think you can give the appearance of this being nothing but your kind of counterpoint to the dossier. And I think if you take this memo, if you believe, and Trey Gowdy and some others, Devin Nunes, some of these other House members in particular, the Senate is more deliberative. They don't get involved in such shenanigans as a dossier or a memo. But these aggressive House members, and the Freedom Caucus in particular, they're a little bit like Trump. I mean, they'll take on the status quo. They feel like they're there to challenge Washington and the powers to be. And I think Trump has empowered some of these people. And I think the reason these people have a viable stance right now goes back to what I talked about Trump's RCP polling average. I think for most of 2017, there was the unwillingness to get too cuddled up to Donald Trump because you didn't know if there was any fire there or not. You'd been told for a year there's a lot of smoke there. We've got a special counsel. We've got an investigation. We've got a lot of he said, she said. We've got several indictments, Papadopoulos and Manafort and General Flynn. We've got some real indictments here. And as a Republican office holder, I don't know how close I want to get to that. But I'm wondering now what the confidence level is of the Republicans, because all of a sudden they're not shying away from that debate. They're very much in their comments and commentary, they're very much consistent with Donald Trump. And it leads me to believe that they have a lot of confidence in this memo, that they have done some sincere investigating, that they do have some information that shows them that maybe, just maybe, the previous administration did some of the things that Donald Trump alleges they did, wiretapping. Now, Trump says wiretapping in a very a figurative way. some of his detractors take it in the most literal sense. That's the mistake a lot of people make with Trump. He doesn't necessarily speak in literal terms. A lot of what he says is figurative. You and I don't have a problem with that. Some of the never Trumpers do. But I think if you release the memo as it is, how it is, and in the manner of which I'm afraid the Republicans will, Rev, I think it begins to look very similar to the counterpoint of the dossier, and I don't think the Republicans are well served if indeed they choose to go that course. Now, there's some language in here. There's some fairly strong language, and I think the Daily Beast, if I'm not mistaken, probably had what I've seen as its first leak. And they've been real careful about not leaking of any of this information. I don't know if that's good or bad, but the majority of these things normally have intentional leaks very early on. Who told that? Well, you know who told that. You wanted it told. I had a buddy of mine in Pamplico, and if we did something at the county that I wanted to get out there, I'd always tell him and say, don't tell anybody. Before I got home that afternoon, everybody in town knew about it. So these intentional leaks.
You're telling those secrets now.
Well, I mean, you know, that's just the way. There's a couple of good old boys that you can always say, I'm going to tell you something now, but you can't tell anybody. If you tell anybody, we're going to have trouble.
You can count on that.
I mean, it's exactly what I wanted to get out and the sort of messaging I wanted to be there. But they're alleging some egregious allegations. I mean, they really are when you think about the FBI, the DOJ, the Obama administration. It specifically, this is per the Daily Beast today, it specifically names FBI Director Andrew McCabe, former FBI Director Jim Comey, and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Those names are personally, and I would imagine very intentionally mentioned in this memo. There are about 60 GOP lawmakers who want to make this information public. What I'm saying is it is a Republican majority authored report. It is simply a memo. It is simply a narrative. It is simply a commentary. And I think to not give the appearance of it being a hit job and the work of hacks, as I think the dossier is being kind of deemed and labeled as, let DOJ vet it. Give it to DOJ. Say, hey, man, we've done a lot of investigating in the House side. Here's what we have found to be true. I found Adam Schiff's comments. He dismisses the memo. That's Woody from Toy Story. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
I think Rush calls him Pencil Neck.
Pencil Neck, yeah.
I call him Woody from Toy Story. You know exactly who I'm talking about. A Democrat from California, as if there are anything other than Democrats from California. It's almost like the other day when somebody said liberal professor. You don't have to say liberal professor anymore. Yeah. Just say professor. We know exactly what his political leanings are. Schiff has already dismissed the memo as profoundly misleading talking points drafted by Republican staffers. That's Schiff's commentary. So I'd be real careful. I would advise, and I think it's smart for the Republicans, give this 4-page memo to DOJ, tell them to take a month or so and have at it. But when I think about the 40.1% RCP polling average of Donald Trump, let's say Trump doesn't have trouble with Russia. Let's say Mueller gets to the end and he says, look, man, this guy's different. This guy's crazy. He says things that, good Lord, he shouldn't say. But I can't reprimand him for that. I mean, the American public spoke. This is who they want to be their president. I can't find any evidence of collusion or obstruction of justice. Trump's polling numbers could go to 46 or 7 or 8. And if they go to 6, 7, or 8, the Democrats have big trouble. Big trouble. Not only in 18, but 20 as well. We'll take a break. We'll be back after the break. Thanks to Schofield's on a Thursday morning. Good morning, PD Live 95.